Welcome to Inside Reality. This is a weekly podcast. I'm Jeffrey Candelaria with the main host and producer, Mr. Jimmy Tran, where we endeavor to search for truth, dismiss hypocrisy, and dialectically look at issues from opposing points of view in an effort to find out what enlightenment looks like and take a peek at truth.
Yes.
How you doing, Jimmy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for being a part of this. I'm excited. This is always a fun time to have conversations with, someone that, really appreciate, not just regurgitating kind of rhetorics or whatever, but really just kind of dissecting the issues in a more nuanced way as necessary. I mean, and trying to maybe even hopefully get a sense and figuring out what might be going on in the world, right? I mean, so
well, and remember Plato and particularly I think it was Aristotle. This is like 2,300 years ago. Introduced the mechanism of dialectic debate and criticism.
Yeah.
So they had conviction, but they looked at the opposing person's conviction and really put themselves into that perspective to try to understand where that person, was coming from.
Yeah.
Truly jumping in another person's, pair of shoes and walking a mile.
Yep.
That's what I try to do. And I believe you try to do when we dissect dialectically issues that the people on Fox or CNN are incapable of even considering because they're so dichotomized.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the challenge, right? I mean, because it's easy to kind of look at life and look at situations from our vantage point, right? And and of course, our vantage point comes with whatever worldview that we have, right? And so. Right. So whether it's because we were beaten as a child, so therefore we, our worldview of certain individual because, is going to be different. Now, if we've never work on those issues and overcome them to not allow those to dictate our thoughts, actions, and even our emotions, right? I mean, those are all drivers. And so on the Freudian side, if you will, right? I mean, the inner child, the whole, mommy daddy issues and all that. I mean, those all are reality.
Id,
they
ego,
do play out.
Ego.
Yeah, they do all play out. Now the question is, do we allow those things to control us, right? Or do we actually have a command over? I mean, I'm not saying that we have to be perfect, but certainly if we recognize it, then we can, we can then take specific actions. And
anyways, we become prisoners of our own construct.
Correct.
Based on childhood experiences. Yeah. And that's why I'm so adamant about provoking people, because I'm very provocative about think, man. Think, independent of me and you and whatever your group says, think. And because I was subject to a very dysfunctional childhood. We'll do a whole show on that. My mother died when I was 10. I was in a car wreck with her. She's 30 years old. She's dead, bleeding all over the damn ground. Yeah. And that was horrific. But that was an episode in my life, and I did everything in my power to not let that define me. I'm not going to allow myself to be oppressed because my mother died and my father was in Vietnam, and I'm raised by my grandparents in a blighted area of Albuquerque. No. My brother and I made every effort to just, live there, but always think about something bigger than that.
Yeah.
And it was hard, and it still is hard. And that's the problem with most people in this country, maybe around the world. When I say most, I'm talking about at least 51% or more of the 340 million people here. They're lazy. They don't welcome discomfort, and they're looking for excuses to basically live a life of sloth. Sorry, you can hate me, but that's a fact. Just go to Walmart and look around, okay?
Yeah.
And I know that's a pretty inflammatory statement, but I didn't make the rules. Just look around.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking about that, a few days ago in terms of, like not so much the big question, right? What is the meaning of life, right? I mean, that's all is the proverbial statement. However, I mean, I think that as an exercise, at least for me, I try to look at, okay, what are my impacts? What am I doing that are making a difference at different levels? And I know that when we have affluence, when we have resources that are, given, those things are, if not, we have distractions, right? I mean, here's an example, right? I mean, if we're constantly trying to figure out, what we're going to eat, where we're going to, sleep, and if there's going to be, if I'm going to be protected from the weather or from other people, whatever, right? I mean, those can be tough. I mean, there's a lot of time in my life where, homeless was a situation that I had to deal with, right? And in those times, I was thinking about like staying there or kind of move on from there. I mean, as an example of situations that can be, that it can evolve, right? And so I think that a lot of people, I don't know if a lot of people are thinking about anything beyond kind of that immediate need, at least not in the US.
Yeah, that's why they exist, because their parents had 20 kids instead of one or none, because they weren't thinking about extrapolating into the future. Maybe I shouldn't have 5 kids. Maybe I shouldn't have any. I can't even afford to feed myself. That's the point. Think before you act. And so many of these problems wouldn't exist. Homelessness wouldn't exist if we thought more about maybe not having 29 kids, or being able to feed myself. Or maybe I shouldn't marry this guy because he doesn't have a job. But boy, I love him. I'm in love with him.
Yeah.
So engage both parts of our brain, the emotion part and the analytical part. Our society has moved away from meritocracy that built this rocket behind me, where this is a facsimile of a rocket that was built. Some of it was Nazi science. I understand that. But we went to the moon 60 years ago, Jimmy, based on science and meritocracy and analytical thinking.
Yeah.
And
it wasn't easy.
It wasn't like, how do I feel about going to the moon? No, we're going to the moon because it represents technological innovation. It also will help us through almost unintended consequences find new science and other technologies by virtue of building this rocket. That's analytical thinking. It's not, how do I feel about going to the moon?
Yeah.
We moved from a society of meritocracy and science to everything's about emotion, emotive motivation, how we feel. Think before you have 20 kids. And maybe you don't have people on the street.
Yeah.
That's why I never had kids. I didn't want kids.
Well, there's also an area of balance there. I mean, we can't have no kids, right? I mean, obviously, and we certainly can't have, like you're saying, 30 kids. No, I don't. At least in our modern world, I don't think that anyone, especially here in the United States, that are having a gazillion kids. Okay, yeah, they might have a lot of kids now. Now, granted, there are some that have a lot of kids because they're playing the system, right? Because the more kids you have, because there's an incentive for that, and so they play that. They play that game. Now, there's also those that are just irresponsible, right? They go out and they,
playing the system is irresponsible.
No, well, that is true. But what I'm saying is that they play the system intentionally, meaning that they know that if they got, and that's really what one of the big issue that came out of the Great Society. I think it was called the Great Society with LBJ when the whole. I mean, when it's really interesting. A few years ago, I saw a graph that showed like the economic, growth and impact on the war on poverty, right? Because that was really what was the intention, was the war on
Great Society, or was
the Great Society. So yeah, and what was interesting is that they look at we've spent trillions of dollars over a certain over the time, and the needle barely moved when it comes to poverty. So you have to ask, okay, well, what happened there, right? I mean, but then we also created a very, very interesting outcome as well. I mean, we're talking about illegitimate children born out of wedlock, for instance, right, where there's this instability of society that come from this very, very transient type of situation. I mean, that's a big factor that came out of that whole thing. And of course,
I'm a product of a broken family.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm such a hard ass about it, because I overcame it. It was hard. It still is.
Yeah.
But I didn't sit there, oh my God, I'm oppressed. I'm Hispanic. I'm in a blighted area. Yeah, I felt that. But my mind said, be bigger than feeling and do something about it.
Yeah.
And that's my point. Forget about all these government programs and, like protesting and all that. As an individual, take charge of your life. And it's hard. Yeah. My God, it's so much more liberating. And I live much more of a quality of life and an enlightened sense of experience than a lot of people I grew up with, who chose to just like sit there and stay there and let external institutional forces throw crumbs and guide their lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's
the problem with the message that conservatives teach. I'm a Republican. I don't like the Republican Party, but our message is hard to teach. Like I said before in previous broadcasts, you're fat, don't eat so much, exercise. Their message is, oh, don't shame me because I'm fat. Where's the Doritos? What do you think about that, Jimmy? I'm asking you a question.
Yeah. No, I agree that
it's a hard message to sell.
It is a hard message to sell.
Personal responsibility.
It is.
To be resourceful.
Absolutely.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Well, but the outcome is amazing.
Well, that's the thing, is that when we allow others to dictate, I mean, like right now, right? I mean, we're going through this, I mean, today is the 9th of April in 2025, and we're going through this period of transition, if you will, right? Where we have a situation with, these tariffs that are being levied against countries that have had a trade imbalance with us, right? We're in negative deficit, in some cases, significant amount of deficit. In other cases, we're, mild amount. And what's really interesting is watching those that complain, just like when we were seeing this stuff a few weeks ago with cutting of programs and so forth. And what was really interesting that I noticed is that the people that were yelling and screaming the loudest were the ones that obviously have some effect on them, meaning that their cash cow, if you will, is no longer going to be producing any more, milk, if you will.
Entitlement.
And so that to me is the revealing truth. And it's not even about being, because I have friends that are in different things, and I can see why they would be upset. I mean, if they were relying on that government grant, right, to feed them, to take care of their family or whatever. And so I get the plight that they're in terms of that. Okay. But at the same time, though, on the flip side of that, is that something that we want to continue? That's part of the question too. It's like, well, how much of what we do from a public governmental standpoint that we should continue to do? And that's where the debate doesn't actually happen. Rather, it's only on the, well, all these people are now, like they're unable to do this and that because, their lifestyle is now impacted, right? So I can understand that. Just like with the tariffs, there's a talk about eliminating what's called the middleman, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with kind of some of the way that that global policies take place, right? There would be groups of people that would go and negotiate a deal, and they would do it more on a private level, even though the public kind of connection is established. I don't know the particular. Are you familiar with what I'm
talking about? Brokering.
Yeah, they broker the deal, and so that they get that kickback, but then they levy and leverage the government and the NGO, through the NGOs and whatnot to make that whole thing happen. And so that's how they get paid, is through that whole process. And so because of that, all of a sudden these tariffs and all these percentages all get put into place.
So we just bought tickets today to a Def Leppard concert coming in Albuquerque.
Yeah.
We had to pay a brokerage fee.
Yeah.
When I first started going to concerts in the 70s, you bought it directly from the promoter.
From promoter,
no broker fees.
Yeah.
Which ticket is less expensive to me, the consumer?
Yeah.
Buying directly from the promoter.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about.
Well, the same thing
that's what Trump's trying to do, is eliminate all this extraneous waste in terms of even constructing a calculation for a transaction. Like, I sell to you a country, you sell to me, and the tax for the privilege to sell into your market and vice versa should be about the same. That's all he's doing.
Yeah. Actually, what's interesting is that I saw something this morning on that, and that is that the EU actually says, okay, we're going to go, 0 for 0 or something like that. I don't remember the exact wording, but basically they say, okay, we're gonna bring things down. I mean, maybe not on all areas, but we're gonna bring things down to where there's a 0 for 0. Which, if you really think about it, if you're charging me 10% and I'm charging you 10%, I mean, that's the effect of that is 0, right? I mean, so that is to me that feels like more of what free trade happens, right? Is at that level, rather than just this game that we've seen played, where there's this kind of, it's free trade, but you gotta subsidize for my my prices, if you will.
Yeah, I think that part of the problem with all these fat politicians, Republicans, Democrats, I don't care if you're Trump, I don't care if you're that idiot Schumer, Pelosi, AOC, any of these idiots, they really don't do a good job of explaining the fundamentals of whatever policy they're advocating for. Like, even Trump, his really very attractive blonde press secretary, forgot her name. Anyway, she's a lot smarter than that binder lady that was there under Biden. For me, she should spend 10 minutes just explaining what a tariff is, and using a country like India, which I think was charging us like 30% for the privilege of selling to them.
To them, yeah.
And whatever we were charging them in reverse, and just explaining it. Because they just like talk, use all this parlance, all the nomenclature, all the vernacular, and assume the average person understands. And here's the other issue. The average person really doesn't want to understand, because their priorities are more about, what pizza are we ordering tonight, and who's dating who in Hollywood.
Yeah.
So you got issues on both sides. The elites who run the damn country, including the bureaucrats, and the dumb sloth population that probably occupies 75% of the 340 million people in America. And it's probably like that all over the world. Or maybe it's not, because we're a little bit more spoiled as an overall population.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. Do you think people that are oppressed in North Korea, again, that's a homogeneous population, right? You with me so far?
Yeah.
They're oppressed. Do you think those people are more concerned with politics than privileged sloth Americans who just eat too many nachos and drink too much and watch too much stream TV?
Yeah. Well, that's what I was trying to get at earlier about saying that, because we live in such affluence, right? I mean, literally, relatively speaking, that is part of it. And we live in also this relative freedom. And so therefore, there's this, okay, I'll get to it whenever I get to it. So there's kind of this laissez-faire type of attitude about life and so forth. And then while other people are in other places are like wrangling with making sure that they don't get slaughtered for one thing or another, right? Or even trying to make sure that there's enough food. I mean, I know that, here's the thing too, is that we in the United States are one of the, historically speaking, right? We're one of the most generous countries in the world, in terms of the culture of giving, right? I mean, and support. I mean, if you look at history, you can't say that there's hasn't been so much philanthropic type of that are happening at all levels. I mean, even in organizations that we've part of, right? I mean, the whole idea of doing business and then being able to give back into community, right? To support community efforts and so forth.
But there's so much abundance here. That's why.
Well, that's right. Yeah, but that was created from
when you have abundance. Didn't Jesus teach that about that one old lady that?
No, actually, that was
her.
His, but she
I thought
gave
he
out
said
of her
in that one parable, the rich guy gave like
a lot
20 denar or something, and the little lady, with no money gave pittance.
So
and the apostle was criticizing. Well, she only gave a pittance, and the other guy gave a lot of. And he said, well, he gave from abundance.
Yep.
She gave from poverty.
Yeah, she came from because it was from the heart. So, but all I'm saying is that if you look at the scope of, I mean, of course I haven't traveled, all over the world. I mean, like even this whole thing with tips, right? I mean, right now is a big thing, right? I mean, people are just, going nuts with tips, for instance, right? And I remember during the pandemic, there were people that are like, oh, we got to make sure that we take care of these people, and so they gave extra tips just to make sure that the people that were serving them in the restaurants and so forth, for instance, be able to survive. Now, obviously, businesses kind of caught on to that a little bit, right? And so they started to add the tip line to every transaction, regardless of whether, I don't know, so there is kind of that happening as well. But you're right, there is a lot of abundance here, and because there is a lot of abundance, we do we do have a lot of giving that happens, but not everybody that is giving necessarily is giving because they have a lot either, so I mean, they do kind of, I think that as a general culture.
I don't agree with the premise that we're a giving nation. I think we give overall because there's so much abundance. Yeah. I mean, I live a little bit on the upper middle class area. By worldly standards, I live like a king.
Sure.
And I thank the universe for that. Yeah. But you know what else I thank? Me. Because I earned it. And it's hard.
Sure.
Not easy. Like all these people criticize all these millionaires and billionaires. Well, maybe they just worked harder than you.
Yeah.
I remember this guy. He was a white privileged boss I had in banking. And he was a white privileged guy. I'm going to be honest with you. Kind of arrogant, all that. So he lived in Tonawanda, which is like it's the Beverly Hills of Albuquerque. You with me so far?
Mm-hmm.
He had $1 million house. Kind of a jerk. But you know what? The guy worked 7 days a week. Got in the office at 6 a.m. He didn't leave till 6 in the evening. And I'd call him on Sunday in an emergency situation about a client, pick up the phone. The guy worked hard. Maybe he just earned it. And all these people that hate wealth, maybe they just didn't work hard enough to even be participating in the wealth journey. And I think that's really a lot of the issue with this country, destroying Teslas and all that. People that don't have and don't create, for the most part, history has demonstrated this, destroy.
Yeah.
Because they resent what they don't have because they didn't earn it.
Yeah. You choose.
Nobody talks about that.
Yeah.
And that's so obvious.
Well, every day, every day the choice is clear. Life or death, that's the choice. You either choose to live or you choose to die, right? You choose the decisions that leads to life or you choose decisions that leads to death. Okay, that's the first part. The second part is the choosing of blessings and curses, if you will, right? Or, so yeah, I mean, things happen to life. I mean, in life, things happen all the time, right? What we choose, do we choose the path that leads to blessing, or do we choose the path that leads that eventually causes, a situation what, we would consider as a curse, right? Yeah. So that to me is very clear choice that we all make every day at whatever level, now it doesn't mean that every choice is easy, right? Because actually this morning I heard
that's what I've been
yeah.
for the last 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Success is hard. Building that rocket over there 60 years ago, very difficult.
Yeah.
How many rockets blew up on the launch pad?
Oh,
the Mercury rockets all blew up.
But we don't
see astronauts lost their lives.
But because we
January
don't see
of '68.
Yeah.
Sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right. And what these misfit, crazy woke liberal populations don't understand is the destruction they're participating in ultimately will lead to their destruction.
Yep.
Because if they continue to destroy Teslas, then they start destroying the next production, institution, and the next, and the next, and the next. Well, people won't produce anymore, and we'll live in dystopia. Well, and they'll live in a nihilistic dystopian world that they created by virtue of their own destruction.
Yeah. Well, you've heard of the crab scenario, right? I mean,
I lived it all my life.
Yeah. Well, that
still have scars on my feet because I crawl out of that damn bucket.
Yeah, but that's really what I mean. That's a very good illustration of what the human condition is, if you will, right? Especially people that don't ever see.
Describe briefly the crab.
So the
metaphor
crab,
for
the metaphor is real simple, right? I mean, if you ever been around or dealt with crabs, right? You put them all in a bucket, and you could pretty much don't have to put a lid on it. They won't let anybody else climb out of it. I mean, anytime one of them gets to the top, he gets pulled back down. That's just the way it works. It's not like they're cheering for, oh, look, Joey just got out. Yay, Joey, you know? So that, and that is
there's a resentment for success that certain populations exhibit throughout history, but particularly now you see it because people resent other people who dared to be successful that look just like them.
Yeah. Well, I guess
the blacks call it the Uncle Tom syndrome.
Yeah.
When blacks would assimilate into white society and live a quality of life, I've lived it as a Hispanic in New Mexico. People resent me. I have a degree. I have a college degree. I married a white chick. I live in a nice 2-story house. I have a BMW.
So here's the
half the population here hates me.
So what do you? So let's dissect that for a moment because I think that's an important, kind of thing. What do you think that is the case? Why people resent successful people?
I think in our culture, I grew up Hispanic, Catholic. There's a certain sense of betrayal that I betrayed the patriarchy, because I didn't stay in the little Hispanic community and eat tortillas all my life. So now I eat vichyssoise, steak Diane, Oscar style this, that,
I don't know half of that. So you live in a different world than I do.
High-end bourbon, BMWs. So people hate that because it's not like, hey, bro, where's the tortillas? So it's almost like reminding them that people can move away from that. They didn't. A lot of them secretly wish they understood what vichyssoise was or is. And, have a nice house and all that. But they didn't work hard enough. They dared not to be uncomfortable enough. They dared not to go through the gauntlet of ridicule as I did. And so maybe I'm just reminding, or not me, but successful people are reminding them of what they're not.
Okay.
And there's also the betrayal to their own anthropology. You're Chinese, I think, or part Chinese.
Yeah.
If you don't marry a Chinese person, you're from Shanghai. I know in the Japanese culture, in certain areas of Japan, if you marry a non-Japanese, you're almost excommunicated.
Yeah.
There's a sort of resentment, a betrayal to your community. I think it's the betrayal to the culture and also reminding people what they're not because they didn't work hard enough.
Yeah. Well,
what do you think?
Well, there's a few pieces there. I mean, so for one, tribalism is one of the thought that came to mind. I mean, we talked about that in previous episodes, right? I mean, where Where tribalism is basically, I mean, it stems from, okay, well, this is me, my wife, here are my children, so
we all look the same.
Yep, and I'm a
tribe. Same food.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, because you're assuming that my wife has to be the same ethnic background. Maybe my wife isn't the same ethnic, so no, we don't look the same. Right?
I thought you were talking about members of the same tribe.
Yeah, no, that is still a tribe. I mean,
it is.
No, what I'm saying is that I am the origin of a tribe is how I'm presenting this, right? Versus how people generally look at it is like, okay, a tribe is basically people that are homogeneously the same ethnically and genetically. Okay, there's a different, right? So
racially.
So we're talking about racially, and that's really one of the
biology and ethnic is cultural.
Correct. Well,
yeah.
Race, yeah. Well, depends. I mean, actually, the argument is that there is no race. There's only one race, or there's only three race, and then anyway, that depends on how the anthropologist kind of breaks that out. Yeah, that's a whole other conversation. But my point is that generally speaking, historically, right, you don't mix people. Okay, that's why if you look at the history of nations of the world, okay, they're all politically formed around an ethnic group, whatever that is. Okay. So Europe is a perfect example of that, right? Where you have all these nations, so to speak, right? Where there's Germans, French, Italian, whatever. They're all different groups ethnically. Okay. Yeah. There's some similarities and whatnot, but they're ethnically, they're very different.
Celts, the Druids.
Yeah.
The Saxons, the Franks.
Yeah. And now, of course, you lump it all in as white people, and that's what that's what is done. But then, just like they lump it all in as Asian people. Well, do you know that Russians are actually Asians, even though they're white like the European white, but they're Asians because most of their geographic area is in Asia, if you will, right? But
I get that.
That's a whole
other thing. Hispanic. I'm not Mexican.
Yeah.
We get lumped into the whole
Latino
Puerto
thing. Yeah,
Rican,
exactly.
Cuban.
So to me, that's the first stage, right? And then, of course, the EU was formed to build this economic, union, okay? Because they, to compete against the United States, that was part of what they were doing. But what they didn't do was they didn't create a synergistic culture that really, if you look at the United States, we have a very interesting, we really are the epitome of free trade. Right? Because New Mexico trades with California, trades with Texas, with Arizona, with Colorado, whatever, right? I mean, we have trade all over within this union, but we do it in a different way, right? We don't charge tariffs. I mean, we have different methods that, that takes place that generate revenue through that, right? And so this is all part of what the people don't realize is that we are kind of this microcosm, of independent countries that have been unified under a layer of protection called the federal government. Okay, but because we've failed to understand that as the model, we look at the world and say, "Oh, we want to be like Denmark," and because look at their whole program because they take care of everybody, because and that kind of stuff. And so anyway, that I know I'm digressing.
I don't know what I have no idea what we're talking about. But
going back to what we were talking about,
tribalism. I thought we were talking about tribalism.
Well, that is tribalism, right? Tribalism is part of what drives those things. Is okay. So my point is that when, excuse me, when we're dealing with people that don't look like us, right? I mean, the I guess you could say the genetic code that's within us, right? That been there, say, oh, they're freaky, they're afraid. But I don't know if that's necessarily true, because when you have a baby, right? And when the baby, grows up and experience somebody, unless somebody's doing, I don't know. I mean, that's a very interesting, inquiry to find out, how does the child, because if you look at like even prejudice and racism, if you will, right? I mean, a child doesn't.
What you're asking is racism intrinsic? Is it learned? I think it's a combination, because I think there was a study done I'm going to say 70 years ago, somewhere there, where little babies were reviled by the reptiles.
Yeah.
I'm almost sure. Don't quote me on that. But when a baby was subjected to a snake, I mean, they didn't put a rattlesnake right next to the infant, but the infant was instinctively reviled by a snake.
But that's different.
There is no, I understand that, but I'm saying there are certain intrinsic proclivities that we're wired with, and I do think so. Babies are not a good example because when you subject a white baby to an African American baby, neither of them have resources. Their brains haven't developed enough to understand the complexities of real fear, of threat, of somebody who has resources and I don't, of understanding safe space, how to construct weaponry, any of that. So I'm not sure.
But you're making my point.
Extrapolate.
Well, you're making my point in the sense that.
Okay, how am I making your point?
Well, where this is a largely learned behavior, right? To hate another person because they look different from us. That's where I was getting to, right? I
think it's largely, but I think it's also, I think there's some intrinsic part of it as well. I do.
Yeah, well, there is certainly
people look different. They just inherently, there is a sense of they're different, and difference represents uncertainty, and people try to reduce uncertainty all their lives.
But that's only on the limbic, on the cortex side, the neocortex side of it, not on the limbic level. Limbic level has a totally different an evaluation, though. That's my point. So
that rocket was built with cortex, not feeling,
correct. But when you're dealing with a baby, the cortex hasn't been formed much yet, right? And so the most of the processes that are occurring is all limbic, right? Which is why a scary noise, right, a sudden noise will make the child respond and react differently than
probably cry.
Yeah, exactly. And so these are all different mechanisms. Actually, it was interesting too.
But babies don't run countries.
No, they don't.
So we become adults. Adults run things.
Yes,
but we can be all the love and peace and let's all get along, baby talk and all that. But unfortunately, men and women, mostly men, run the world. Don't get mad. It's just a fact. Not babies.
Yeah. No, and that's fine. I'm not saying that the babies run the world, but I'm just saying that through the development from a baby to a child, to a young child and to an adult, that process is what I'm talking about here, where the particulars of race or gender and all that doesn't really have much meaning until those elements starts to develop. Okay. And once those elements start to develop, of course, the inputs from the parents, from no parents, from their siblings, from their grandparents, and all these inputs.
So mostly the groups they hang out with.
What's that? Yeah.
Mostly the groups they hang out with and the populations that reflect their worldview.
Correct.
Impact racism.
Absolutely.
That's how I see it.
That does play it. So when you have a culture, that's what a culture is, right? To me, that's how I look at it, right? A culture is basically at all the different levels, right? I mean, you can have a family and a culture, just like you can have a corporate culture, right? The corporate culture is this versus that, right? And so to me, there's a general underlining culture, right? Because if you look at the word even, right, cult, right? Cult meaning the alignment of thought, if you will, right? And so when you're dealing with culture, the American culture is very different than let's say the French culture or the German culture, okay, or even the Japanese culture, okay, and so we can see that kind of from a societal level, right? Now, obviously,
I'd like to do a podcast on that because I don't like Nietzsche said there's no universal truth. I don't think there's an American culture. I think you've had zeitgeist American cultures, like the Gilded Age culture, the pre-Civil War culture, depending on where you lived. You had East Coast, West Coast culture. You've got the Middle America culture. Now you have to factor in which time you're talking about. I don't think there's an American culture. I don't believe in this whole American, the Superman, he would talk about the American way of life or something. I don't know what that is, other than we are blessed with, relatively speaking, a little more liberty than most in the world, and a little more abundance than most, maybe a lot more, and maybe even more opportunity for those that want to actually get off their butt and do something. Than you're afforded other than that. But I don't know that there is.
But that is the culture, though. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, that's fine.
That is the core.
But I thought you were trying to get into the Americans believe in you just said philanthropy earlier, or we believe in independent individual thinking. I don't think that happens anymore.
Well, yes, we might not be doing much of it today as much as it was maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago or whatever. But I'm just saying that is kind of from my, because what I was trying to do is to take a step back, right? And then kind of look at the whole, right? I mean, I've traveled a good part of the world, obviously. And so I got to experience different groups and different cultures, right? Like here's an example of one that is culturally so different already, right? The whole concept of commerce, right? The United States, the culture of commerce is that you can go to a place, you can buy something. The expectation is that you can actually return it if you didn't like it. Okay, that's the business culture. That is one of the common thing. If you go anywhere else in the world, that's not how you're going to experience that, right?
Well, yeah, but that's because you're making my point, because there was a standard of excellence that we used to have that we no longer have.
No.
That's why you can return something. Because in America, and maybe you're making a point there that I hadn't seen before, and I give you some regard for that. When somebody built this little drinking vessel, it was built with such quality in America or wherever we got it from.
Sure.
That as a population, if there's a leak or it doesn't work or whatever, I'm taking it back, because we do have standards of performance.
Yes, correct.
That this rocket was based on.
Correct.
My argument overall is that standard of excellence is being degraded because of mediocrity and sloth
and a number of other
people
factors.
Assuming things are going to always be like this.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's like when the Republic ended right after Julius Caesar was assassinated, maybe 40 years after, the decline of the Roman Empire was already put in place because of the concentration of power with the emperor.
Yeah, no, I get that. And
that's where I think we're at with this country. I think we're doomed.
Well,
we don't celebrate meritocracy and excellence.
Well, we were definitely heading in that direction, right? I mean, there's been an interesting, slow but surely resurgence, if you will, of this, right? I mean, partly we're seeing that in the
Trump,
with the administration, obviously with the priority for meritocracy, for instance, as opposed to just the all the alphabets that you can add to your name, kind of thing. So,
right.
So that's one part.
I hope you're right.
And
I hope he's changed the trajectory of our country. That it's no longer about how do we feel, as opposed to I don't care how I feel. I want excellence, and it's going to feel bad for a while.
Well,
that's what the tariffs are.
Yeah. Well, you can also
it's going to be kind of economically chaotic for a while, in the pursuit of a more excellent equilibrium in terms of import-export with our trade partners, various markets all over the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always the balance and counterbalance, right? I mean, so you can go too far on one side and then you go too far the other side, right? I mean, to me, that's why if you look at it, we have equally amount of brain on the left as we have on a brain on the right. I'm not talking about politically. I'm talking about in our gray matters, right? Now, and really, if you look at it, the if you will, the emotion or the more fluid experience in life, right, is processed through the right side of the brain, whereas the structured and more kind of form and rigid, systematic logic type of thing are on the left side of the brain. Okay, so it's not like we can do with one without the other. And this is why I think, to me, what we observe is this pendulum, if you will, that have swung from one side where we prioritize, the merit to the degree where we sacrifice, the impact of the people on some level, right? Because there is some emotion because we're human, right? And so this is where, like, for instance, the way that you were saying before about, okay, well, the administration didn't do a good job of communicating what they were going to do, right? And so a lot of people are just left kind of getting just slapped in the face, obviously, right? I mean, so now, to be fair, there were plenty of, and have been months and months, because I was going back in my mind and kind of reviewing some things, right? There's been months and months, even throughout his whole campaign, for instance, Trump, that he was going to do this, and that, right? Nobody believed him. That was that was part of it, right? And so they're like, oh no, and if they did believe him, they think that, oh, it's going to take him the full term or whatever to do it, right? Not in 40 days, right? Or 90 days or 70 days, whatever.
That's what I admire about him. He's doing what he said he was going to do.
So that's what really freaking out all these people, is because we're seeing it.
Politicians for the last 100 years, at least that I know of,
kick the can.
Basically did not do what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, they just kick the can so that they can leave that, because there's political consequences to doing it. I mean, think about that from them. I mean, look at the fallout. They were worried about they were more concerned about getting reelected. Yeah.
Or not damaging their brand.
Or their legacy, because they want to make sure that
Trump,
they're...
Again, like I said before, he's not really a political animal. He is, of course, but that's like fourth down his list. He's an egomaniac, number one. Two, he wants to build a legacy, which is part of his egomaniac. The good news is he attaches himself to policies that are practical, that make sense, that are usually about money, because people respond to that. And he's built his presidential legacy on those things.
Yeah.
Not as a political person trying to get reelected, or what do you think about me on CNN?
Yeah.
But are you going to build a statue of me because I created a lot of wealth for myself and a lot of other people? But remember what I said, myself first. I don't disagree. He's all about himself. But the osmosis effect is the wealth. It breeds a lot of wealth that trickles down and is ubiquitous to a lot of other parts of the population. And it's based on a lot of just deal making.
Yeah.
I've been in business all my life. Negotiation happens all the time. And a lot of times, you know this, Jimmy, it's not pretty. You and I negotiate all the time.
Yes.
Just to do this podcast.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that it's also worth, for people that are kind of questioning, like I said, if you look back, even back to the 30 years ago, right? I think it was in the 80s and so forth. I mean, he was on Oprah, and Oprah asked him, it's like, what would you do different, as being well, no, what would you do if you were president, right? Yeah. And he nailed out and named off, things that he had to do. And what's really interesting is that he hasn't changed really from that perspective. And that's the part that I think a lot of the people are so afraid of. Either that, or they didn't realize that because they never saw that, right?
What are they afraid of?
Well,
the problem, I think, is the average dumbbell doesn't understand principles of business, negotiation, supply and demand, how markets work.
Yeah.
How you create something, how you have to copyright it, how you have to protect it, how you have to replicate it, how you have to scale it, how you have to distribute it, how you have to market it, how you have to find consumers for it, how you have to continually monitor the product. It's very complicated.
Absolutely.
And I think that's part of the problem too. People just don't understand the architecture and the mechanisms of a complex society like the United States.
Absolutely. And we don't think big enough too. That's the other side, right? I mean, I was just thinking about that. Like, for instance, I enjoy cooking, right? But cooking for myself is a huge effort. Cooking for even two people is a bit of an effort too, okay? But there's a certain return of that economy of scale, if you will, right? Between cooking for one person, two people, and cooking for 4 or 5 people. Like, cooking for 4 or 5 people is kind of like a sweet spot for the first tier of, if you enjoy cooking, because you can make just enough to where you can get everybody satisfied and you really can enjoy the experience and the food and all that kind of stuff. But then when you start cooking for like, there's a 10 or 15 people, now you got to scale up in a bigger way than you can,
Yeah.
you know, because you don't need to scale up that much when you're cooking for 4 or 5
Dude,
people.
I understand.
So,
I used to produce an event for 2,000 people. And it's, for me, it was all about control, temperature.
Yeah.
And, you know, having consistency of presentation.
Yeah.
Consistency of the actual meal itself. And depending on what you're serving, because you have different densities of the entree, whether it's steak, chicken, fish.
Absolutely.
Each of those densities is going to lose temperature. And again, I used to produce this banquet, and I'm being honest, I was one of the only people that was a producer who was thinking, like, I asked the chef guy, you know, he was given, he did a taste meal for the big shots there, 8 of us. And I said, this is great, but how are you going to serve 2,000 people who aren't going to be all simultaneous?
Yeah.
He looked at me like I just asked him what quantum entanglement.
Yeah.
And the chairman of the board said, Jeffrey, that's an amazing question. Because he said, I came to the banquet 4 years ago and my food was cold. And I never even thought about it.
Yeah.
And so what we did was we had distribution stations with hot carts, HOT carts, distributed in various areas of this huge space to discuss and address that very question that you were bringing up about scaling food and serving it and making sure the experience, you know, was consistent.
Yep.
Anyway,
and that to me is really key. If we understand that, right? Kind of like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Right.
That same kind of construct is important and necessary for it when it comes to scalability of whether it's a business, whether it's our personal, like today, we all might say, oh, we would love $1 million. Okay. And we probably have plenty of ideas on how to spend that $1 million. Okay. But here's the question.
We don't create $1 million.
How? Yeah, exactly. How can we get $1 million and be able to spend it the way we want to spend it, however we want? No bars of any kind, barriers and whatnot. But you still have to be able to sustain that $1 million going forward for, let's say, 10 years.
Well, I think it's even more rudimentary than that. It's what I used to call people want to have, but they don't want to do.
Yep.
The DO.
Yeah.
So you just asked a question. Oh, I want $1 million. But the sloth, the lazy, they don't think about how do we create $1 million in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's the reason I'm such a hard ass, because that's how my world thinks. That's how I think. And I don't apologize for that. I'm thinking about production, creating, moving forward, whatever progress means. And if you want progress, if you want to, you know, I'm gonna have to kill some chickens over here. You want chicken wings and omelets and, you know, a steak. There's gonna be a lot of dead cows, but it's gonna be a bone-in ribeye, served medium rare. It's gonna be sensational. But nobody wants to think how it got there on your plate. Yeah. No one wants to talk about it, especially the woke, misfit liberals. They don't want to talk about how the sausage is made. And most of them are fat sausage eaters. Don't get mad.
No, yeah. And
I like my sausage. And it's an ugly process to make sausage.
Yep. And there's plenty of people that have become vegan or vegetarian because they saw how sausage was made. I mean, that's just, I'm not here to judge anyone. What's that?
Those people that are vegans, a lot of them are wearing leather belts.
Well,
and
yeah.
You know, we're, you know, patrol, all that stuff.
Yeah,
anyway,
so
I think we're about done here.
Yeah, we're wrapping up. Yeah, so you're watching.
Life is complicated.
It is.
Particularly if we want quality of life. A quality of life to me is almost the most complicated.
Yeah.
You know, it's not easy to live in a tent with a sleeping bag and drink water and eat beans all day. But I don't advocate for that. I feel bad for that. That's a lot easier lifestyle than owning a house, paying a mortgage, having insurance, having to be responsible for going to work all day, buying a model rocket that costs $300,
putting it together, right? You had to didn't you have to put that together?
And then I had to assemble it, paint it. It's a lot more complicated than a guy living in a tent with eating beans all day. But I'll tell you what, I'm blessed to live a quality of life. It's hard, but we earned it.
Yeah.
It doesn't just happen. And that's the part that half the population doesn't talk about it.
And I think there's one more piece to that, and we'll maybe end with this thought too, and I'd like to hear your thought. I think that some of us, because it's very common for us to, I know for me, I have a hard time sometimes because the self like flagellation, if you will, right? So we feel guilty because we got something, good in our life, even if we did work on it, right? I mean, and so I think that part of that is because some people, maybe the response and why we're having some people having an issue is that there's an internal sense of guilt that they didn't earn that, but they got it anyway. And so I
don't feel that.
Well, no, I understand that.
I'm supposed to feel that because I was raised Catholic, so I'm supposed to feel guilty about things, but I don't. That form of Catholicism, that the scarcity versus the abundance of mentality is like a cult to me. But remember, abundance has to be earned too. And by the way, there's no abundance unless people create the abundance and have sacrificed to create the abundance.
Yeah. Well, there's two
parts. It doesn't
just
happen.
Well, there's two stuff. I mean, like for instance, I've been doing a little bit more gardening lately, and I've always been observant of kind of the gardening. I mean, when you get a plant, right? I mean, the plant produces the seed, right? I mean, like a tomato, like you cut up open tomato. There's like hundreds of seeds in this one tomato. And all it took was one seed that made this tomato. And that one seed might produce 50, 100 tomatoes off of that one plant. And then out of that one plant, there's a, let's say there's 100 tomatoes, right? And each tomato has 100 seeds, which also can produce 100 plants each, right? So if we understand abundance from that perspective, I mean, you can say, okay, the plant kind of produced it, and so it earned it, but we get to benefit from the plant doing the work, right? I mean, yeah, we do the work initially, right, to get going with the soil and watering and whatnot, right? But after that, really, it's up to the plant to do its job, right? And so there's but
the part that you're not talking about is what I just said earlier. The seed, the tomato has all the potential, for abundance, but somebody's got to work their ass off to create the abundance. To create 1 million tomatoes, you got to toil. You got to create a lot of soil and subject it to the right kind of fertilizer. Harvest it,
water it,
water it, package it, distribute it, create advertising for it. That's what we don't talk about.
Yes, exactly.
The complicated mechanisms and architecture and infrastructure required to create the abundance. And I'll leave you with this. We talked about these nonprofits that were getting all this entitlement check before Trump. What I like about what's happening is, and I worked for a nonprofit for 20 years, what he's forcing people to do under the Trump doctrine, whether people like it or not, is they've got to demonstrate their own excellence.
Yeah.
They've got to demonstrate their own viability. And if you don't, the Darwin effect, right?
Absolutely.
Not only the fittest, but the most adaptable.
Absolutely.
And I call it the Trump Darwin doctrine. He's making institutions and even to some extent populations, people, demonstrate their own worthiness if you want to participate in abundance.
Yeah. So now,
and I love that.
Yeah.
About the Trump Darwin doctrine. I think I just coined that phrase.
There you go. All right. Only on the Inside Reality, where truth and hypocrisy collide, and we get to say and share these ideas. One last thought on that, right? And that is, if you really think about it, right? Oh man, I hate it now. I just lost my train of thought. Sorry. I was so what's interesting is that when you're talking about, these nonprofits getting the merits, right, so that they rise to that level. Geez, I wish I had a rewind on the button on my brain.
Well, they're no longer just serving their little mission statement. We do what do what we do. Now it's like, is your mission statement and is what you do, does it have viability?
Well, that's one part.
Is there a market for it?
Now I remember what I was thinking of. Okay, so let's take a quick mental imagination, right, for a moment, right? And imagine a world where we have no crime, zero crime. Do we need the police if there's no crime?
I would argue yes.
We need the police if there's no crime.
I would.
Yeah. Why?
First of all, I don't accept your premise.
No. Again, you thought experiment here. Not reality.
I'm not going to participate in that because I just don't believe it could ever happen. And I'm using ever.
No.
Okay, go ahead and just.
I'm just saying. My point is that if you have no crime, there's no need for police, right? So you only have the police to exist is because there's crime that you have to deal with at whatever level. So you basically have a system and a mechanism that is necessary for it to serve this other function, which is to make sure that there's no crime. So here's the problem. Can you ever eliminate the police department? Well, obviously not. Like you're saying, there's no such thing as no crime. But that's why I'm saying is that if you have, so the existence of a police, meaning that their livelihood, there's no incentive, if you will, for them to ever reach zero crime, because then they would be out of a job, they would be out of work, things like that. That's my point on that, right?
I don't think they're looking for crime to sustain themselves.
No, I'm not saying that's the case in general. Okay, and I'm not saying don't misunderstand that. I'm just saying that I was just using that as an example where for instance, in 1913, when the Federal Reserve was enacted, right? And then the income tax was then put into place. Then all of a sudden you got to form the IRS in order to make sure that, so those three things are all tied together. The Federal Reserve was put into place, okay? And then they enacted the income tax in order to guarantee the payback for the Federal Reserve, debt system that was established. And in order to do that, you got to have some way to collect the debt, and so or the taxes and so forth that is being laid upon the public. Okay, that's the sequence that happens. So if you were to eliminate one thing, you might eliminate other things, and that's part of the process. Anyway, I know.
I'm not sure what's all right. Well, anyway, Inside Reality, we're with you every week, and we search for truth. It's elusive, and I don't think we're going to find it. But,
but it's the
peek at it.
Yeah, it's the pursuit, right? So if you're interested in sharing your thoughts and comments, definitely put it in the comment section below, the video. We'd love to hear from you because, again, we're not here trying to just talk in this echo chamber vacuum kind of thing. We want dialogue. We want conversations from our viewers. All we ask is just be respectful. We don't like it when, if you deflammatory type of stuff, you'll be, blocked off or deleted. Those messages don't need to stay here. But if it's good comment or good feedback, you don't have to agree with us. You have your own thoughts. I'm happy to hear it. Right. Just be respectful for us and for each other. All right. And if you want to sponsor our show, please, check out our Patreon. We'll be getting that together soon so that you can have a way to give, a way to support us so that we can keep these projects going. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jeffrey, for being a part of this. I'm excited.
Au revoir.
See y'all next time. Bye-bye.